Youngest death sentences of all time. Christa Pike. September 30, 2026. Mark that date. Tennessee will execute a woman for a crime she committed when she was 18 years old. 18. The same age most people graduate high school. But here's the twist that makes this case unlike any other. Her boyfriend was 17 when they did it together. He got life with parole. She got death. In November 2025, he walked into a parole hearing. She got an execution date. Same crime. 1 year age difference. Two completely different endings. And now the clock is counting down. 365 days from the day the Tennessee Supreme Court signed her death warrant. 1 full year to live. But Christa Pike has already been waiting 31 years for this moment. 31 years on death row. She went in as a teenager. She'll walk to the execution chamber in her 50s. If it happens, she'll be the first woman Tennessee has executed in over 200 years. But the question burning through courtrooms and petitions and late-night debates isn't just about whether she deserves to die. It's about why the system gave her death while giving her younger boyfriend a chance at freedom. It's about what happened on a cold January night in 1995 in Knoxville, Tennessee. It's about a 19-year-old girl named Colleen Slemmer who never made it home. And it's about the 18-year-old who made sure she never would. This is the story of the youngest woman on death row in America. This is the story of what she did, what happened to her before, and what happens next.
If you enjoy real, gripping prison documentaries and true stories, don't forget to like this video, leave a comment, and share it with your friends and family. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss more shocking and exclusive content.
The story doesn't start in 1995. It starts years earlier, in a childhood that nobody should have to survive. Christa Pike was born in West Virginia in 1976. Before she could walk, before she could talk, before she had any choice in the matter, her life was already being shaped by violence. Her mother's boyfriends. Her mother's choices. The things that happened behind closed doors that no child should ever see or feel or endure. By the time Christa was old enough to understand what was happening to her, she'd already learned that the world was a place where the strong hurt the weak. Where trust was a weapon. Where love came with bruises. The details are hard to hear. Physical abuse. Sexual abuse. The kind of trauma that rewires a developing brain. That teaches a child that violence is normal. That pain is what you get for existing. Child Protective Services knew about Christa. The system knew. But knowing and fixing are two different things. She bounced through foster homes. Through relatives who couldn't handle her. Through a system that was supposed to protect children but mostly just moved them around like broken furniture nobody wanted. By the time she was a teenager, Christa Pike had been diagnosed with severe mental illness. Bipolar disorder. Post-traumatic stress disorder. Borderline personality disorder. A cocktail of conditions that all traced back to the same source. What happened to her when she was too young to fight back? Too young to escape? Too young to understand that what was happening wasn't normal? Wasn't her fault? Wasn't the way the world was supposed to work? But here's the thing about trauma. It doesn't just hurt you. It changes you. It changes how your brain processes threat. How you react to stress. How you see other people. And sometimes, it changes you in ways that make you dangerous. Not because you're evil. Not because you chose it, but because the wiring got crossed somewhere in all that pain. In 1994, when she was 18, Christa Pike enrolled in the Job Corps program in Knoxville, Tennessee. Job Corps is a federal program designed to help at-risk youth. Kids who've dropped out of school. Kids from broken homes. Kids who need job training and a chance to reset their lives. It was supposed to be Christa's fresh start. Her opportunity to escape the past and build something better. She met Tatterall Shipp there. He was 17. A year younger. Like Christa, he came from a difficult background. Like Christa, he was looking for something. Connection. Purpose. Someone who understood what it meant to grow up in chaos. They became a couple. Intense. Obsessive. The kind of teenage relationship where everything feels like life or death. Where jealousy runs hot and boundaries disappear. Where two broken people find each other and think they've found salvation when really they've just found a mirror. And then there was Colleen Slemmer. 19 years old. Also enrolled in Job Corps. Also looking for a better life. Also carrying her own story of struggle and survival. She became friends with Christa and Tatterall. Part of their circle. Until she wasn't. The exact details of what sparked the conflict depend on who you ask. Some say Colleen was interested in Tatterall romantically. Some say Christa believed rumors that Colleen was trying to steal her boyfriend. Some say it was simpler than that. Just teenage jealousy spinning out of control. Whatever the truth was, by January 1995, Christa Pike had decided that Colleen Slemmer was a problem, a threat, someone who needed to be dealt with. And Christa Pike's childhood had taught her exactly how to deal with threats, with violence, with cruelty, with the same methods that had been used on her. The cycle was about to complete itself. January 12, 1995. Thursday night. Cold. The kind of winter cold that seeps into your bones when you're outside too long. Colleen Slemmer thought she was going for a walk with friends. She thought they wanted to talk, to clear the air, to work things out. She had no idea she was walking toward the last hour of her life. Christa Pike had made a plan. She'd recruited Tatterall Shipp, her boyfriend. She'd brought along Shadala Peterson, another 18-year-old from Job Corps. Whether Shadala knew the full extent of what Christa intended is something that's been debated in courtrooms for decades. But she came along. She walked with them. She watched what happened next. They left the Job Corps Center around 6:30 in the evening. 4 young people walking across campus. Nothing unusual. Nothing that would make anyone look twice. They headed toward a wooded area near the Tennessee Agricultural Campus. About half a mile from the Job Corps buildings. Far enough that voices wouldn't carry. Far enough that screams would fade into the winter air unheard. The area was secluded. Trees. Darkness. The kind of place where you could do something terrible and no one would know until morning. Christa had brought items with her. A box cutter. A small knife. Tools for what she'd been planning. The walk must have felt normal to Colleen at first. Just friends hanging out. Maybe a little tense. Maybe she sensed something was off. But she kept walking. Kept trusting. Kept believing that people who smiled at you and called you friend would act like friends. And then it started. The accounts of what happened next come primarily from Shadala Peterson, who testified in exchange for a plea deal. From the evidence found at the scene. From the things Christa Pike herself said and did afterward. The attack lasted over 30 minutes. Half an hour of violence. Of torture. Of a 19-year-old girl begging for her life while 3 people stood over her and decided she didn't deserve mercy. Christa Pike beat Colleen with her fists. Kicked her. Used the box cutter to slash at her. Carved a pentagram into her chest. Took a piece of her skull as a souvenir. A trophy. Something to remember this moment by. Tatterall Shipp participated. Hit her. Held her down. Made sure she couldn't escape while Christa kept going. Kept hurting her. Kept taking out every ounce of rage and jealousy and broken wiring that years of abuse had created. Shadala Peterson watched. That's what she claimed later. That she just watched. That she tried to get them to stop but they wouldn't listen. That she was scared. That she didn't know what to do. Colleen Slemmer died in those woods. Alone except for the people killing her. Scared. In pain. Wondering why. Wondering what she'd done to deserve this. Probably never understanding that this wasn't about anything she'd actually done. This was about what had been done to Christa Pike years before. This was about trauma finding a target. This was about hurt people hurting people in the worst possible way. When it was over, they left her body there. Walked back to campus. Christa Pike kept the piece of skull in her pocket. Showed it to people. Bragged about what she'd done. Told classmates she'd killed someone. Some people thought she was joking. Making up stories for attention. Being dramatic the way teenagers sometimes are. But she wasn't joking. She'd really done it. And she wanted people to know. The next day, when Colleen Slemmer didn't show up for class, people started asking questions. Started looking for her. Started worrying. By January 14th, 2 days after the murder, police found her body. The investigation moved quickly after that. Shadala Peterson started talking almost immediately. Told police what she'd witnessed. Where it happened. Who did it? Within days, Christa Pike and Tatterall Shipp were arrested. The piece of skull was found in Christa's belongings. Physical evidence was everywhere. Blood. DNA. Forensics that painted a clear picture of what had happened in those woods. There was no mystery here. No question of guilt. The only questions were why and what would happen next. And whether an 18-year-old who'd survived a childhood of unimaginable abuse would face the ultimate punishment for becoming the abuser herself. March 1996. 15 months after Colleen Slemmer's murder. The trial of Christa Pike began in Knox County Criminal Court. She was 19 years old by then. Still a teenager. Sitting in a courtroom where prosecutors were asking for her death. The evidence was overwhelming. Shadala Peterson testified in detail about what she'd witnessed. Forensic evidence matched the story. The piece of Colleen's skull found in Christa's possession was impossible to explain away. There was no doubt about what happened. No question that Christa Pike had tortured and killed Colleen Slemmer. The only question was why and what should happen to her now. The prosecution painted Christa as a cold-blooded killer. Someone who planned the murder. Who brought weapons. Who tortured her victim for over 30 minutes. Who took a trophy and bragged about it afterward. They argued she was dangerous. Irredeemable. Someone who would kill again if given the chance. Someone who deserved the death penalty. The defense had a different story to tell. They brought in psychologists and psychiatrists, experts who'd evaluated Christa, who'd reviewed her history, who understood what years of severe abuse do to a developing brain. They talked about her childhood, the physical abuse, the sexual abuse, the trauma that started before she could remember and continued through her formative years. They talked about her diagnoses: bipolar disorder, PTSD, borderline personality disorder, mental illnesses that were direct results of her abuse. They argued that Christa Pike wasn't born a killer. She was made into one. By the people who were supposed to protect her. By the system that failed to save her. By the lack of proper mental health treatment. They argued for life in prison instead of death. A chance for treatment. For understanding. For recognizing that hurt people and sometimes the cycle can be broken. The jury heard all of it. The horror of what Christa did. The horror of what was done to her. The psychiatric testimony. The victim impact statements from Colleen's family. The pleas for mercy. The calls for justice. After deliberating, they reached a verdict. Guilty of first-degree murder. Guilty of conspiracy to commit murder. And then came the sentencing phase. The part where the jury decides if someone lives or dies. In Tennessee, like many states with the death penalty, there's a process. The prosecution must prove aggravating factors. Things that make the crime worse. The defense presents mitigating factors. Things that explain or reduce culpability. The jury weighs them. Decides which side is heavier. The aggravating factors in Christa's case were strong. The murder was especially heinous. Atrocious. Cruel. It involved torture. It was planned. These are the kinds of factors that lead juries toward death. The mitigating factors were also strong. Christa was 18. Her brain wasn't fully developed. She had severe mental illness. She'd survived horrific abuse. She had no prior criminal record. These are the kinds of factors that usually lead juries toward life. But the jury chose death. On March 30, 1996, Christa Pike was sentenced to die in Tennessee's electric chair. She was 19 years old at sentencing. She'd committed the crime at 18. She became one of the youngest women sentenced to death in the United States in the modern era. Here's what makes this sentence so controversial. Tattero Shipp, who was 17 when he helped kill Colleen Slemmer, was tried separately. He was convicted. He got life in prison with the possibility of parole. 1 year younger. Same crime. Different sentence. The reason is constitutional. The Supreme Court has ruled that executing people for crimes committed before age 18 violates the Eighth Amendment. It's cruel and unusual punishment. So Tattero couldn't get death. He was protected by his age. Christa was 18. Just 1 year older. Just past the constitutional cutoff. Old enough to die for what she did. Shadala Peterson, who'd been there and watched it happen, took a plea deal. 6 years for being an accessory. She served her time. She got out. She rebuilt her life. 3 people involved in one murder. 3 completely different outcomes. Life with parole. 6 years. The appeals process began immediately. Death penalty cases generate automatic appeals. Lawyers argued that Christa's mental illness and traumatic background should have resulted in a life sentence. That executing someone for a crime committed at 18, while sparing someone who was 17, didn't make moral sense even if it was technically legal. That the jury didn't fully understand the impact of childhood trauma on brain development. That Tennessee's death penalty itself was flawed. The appeals went on for years. Through state courts, federal courts, habeas corpus petitions, claims of ineffective counsel, arguments about jury instructions. Every possible legal avenue to stop the execution. Some appeals succeeded in delaying things. None succeeded in changing the sentence. And Christa Pike sat on death row. Year after year. Her 20s. Her 30s. Her 40s. Watching other inmates come and go. Watching her appeals fail. Watching the years pile up while the ultimate outcome stayed the same. Eventually, when Tennessee decided it was time. Death row in Tennessee is a place where time moves differently. Where days blur into years. Where every sunrise might be your last or might be followed by 10,000 more. Christa Pike has lived in this liminal space since 1996. 29 years and counting. The Tennessee Prison for Women houses death row inmates in maximum security. 23-hour lockdown. 1 hour a day outside the cell. No contact with other inmates except through walls and bars. No physical touch except from guards and restraints. This is how Christa Pike has spent nearly 3 decades. In a cell roughly the size of a parking space. With a bed. A toilet. A sink. A small window if she's lucky. Books if she's approved for them. Letters if anyone writes. Photographs if they pass inspection. And the knowledge that this will be her entire world until the day she dies. Death row changes people. Some find religion. Some lose their minds. Some become advocates and activists from behind bars. Some fade into themselves and disappear while still breathing. Christa Pike's life on death row has been marked by isolation and incidents. In 2001, she tried to strangle a fellow inmate. The attempt was stopped. More charges were added. More years of restricted privileges. In 2012, something worse. Pike was caught planning an escape. But not just an escape. She'd been communicating with another inmate. Planning to attack a guard. To use the guard's keys and uniform to get out. When investigators searched her cell, they found the plan written out. Detailed. Violent. Proof that even after nearly 2 decades on death row, even with an execution hanging over her future, Christa Pike was still thinking about violence as a solution. Still seeing other people as obstacles to be removed. The incident resulted in additional charges. A new conviction. More evidence that she was dangerous. That she hadn't been rehabilitated. That the death penalty decision might have been right after all. But here's what's also true. Christa Pike has had minimal access to mental health treatment while on death row. The very diagnoses that her defense lawyers argued should have saved her life have been barely addressed during her incarceration. Bipolar disorder doesn't go away in a cell. PTSD doesn't heal in isolation. The brain that was wired by childhood trauma doesn't rewire itself just because you're locked up. Death row isn't designed for rehabilitation. It's designed for warehousing people until they're executed. There's no point in treatment programs when the assumption is that you're going to die anyway. No point in therapy when your entire existence is about waiting for the state to kill you. So Christa Pike has waited. Through her 20s when most people are building careers and families. Through her 30s when most people are establishing themselves. Through her 40s when most people are hitting their stride. All of it spent in a cell. All of it spent knowing that eventually, if the appeals run out, she'll be taken to an execution chamber and killed. During these decades, the death penalty itself has changed in America. Fewer states use it. Fewer executions happen. Public opinion has shifted. Questions about racial bias, innocence, mental illness, and whether the state should be in the business of killing people have gotten louder. Tennessee hasn't executed anyone since 2020. But the state hasn't abolished the death penalty either. It's still there. Still an option. Still the sentence hanging over Christa Pike. And now, after 29 years of waiting, the wait is almost over. September 30, 2025, the Tennessee Supreme Court issued her death warrant. September 30, 2026, is the date. 1 year. 365 days from warrant to execution. Unless something changes. Unless lawyers find a new appeal. Unless the governor grants clemency. Unless the system that sentenced her to death decides that maybe, after 3 decades, death isn't the answer after all. September 30, 2025. The Tennessee Supreme Court issues a death warrant for Christa Pike. The first woman scheduled for execution in Tennessee in over 2 centuries. The date is set exactly 1 year out. September 30, 2026. The news spreads quickly. Activists immediately mobilize. Death penalty opponents point to Pike's case as everything wrong with capital punishment. She was 18. Her co-defendant was 17 and got life. She had severe mental illness from childhood trauma. She spent 3 decades on death row already. Executing her serves no purpose except revenge. A petition starts circulating. Stop Christa Pike's execution. Within weeks, thousands of people sign it. Many have never heard of her before. Many don't know the details of what she did to Colleen Slemmer. But they know she was 18. They know she was abused. They know 30 years on death row is already a lifetime of punishment. The petition argues that Governor Bill Lee should grant clemency. Should commute her sentence to life without parole. Should recognize that executing someone for a crime committed at 18, especially someone with her background and mental health history, is wrong. Should acknowledge that Tatterall Ship getting parole eligibility while Christa gets death makes no sense. The governor's office receives the petition. Receives letters. Receives phone calls. No statement is made. Pike's attorneys file new appeals. They argue that executing her would violate her constitutional rights, that her mental illness wasn't adequately considered at trial, that developments in brain science since 1996 show that 18-year-olds don't have fully developed brains, particularly in areas controlling impulse and judgment, that the standards for death penalty cases have evolved and her sentence no longer meets them. The courts hear the arguments. The appeals process moves forward. But time is running out. Meanwhile, victim advocates speak up too. They remind everyone that Colleen Slemmer was 19, that she was tortured for over 30 minutes, that she died scared and in pain because of what Christa Pike chose to do, that her family has been waiting 3 decades for justice, that mercy for Pike is another injustice to Colleen, that some crimes are so terrible that death is the only appropriate response. Both sides have valid points. Both sides are arguing from places of genuine belief. And Christa Pike sits on death row, watching the calendar pages flip, watching the countdown, watching her final year of life tick away. In November 2025, Tadaro Shipp has his parole hearing. The man who helped kill Colleen Slemmer, who was 17 when it happened, who got life with parole because he was too young to execute. The hearing happens. The parole board makes its decision. The details aren't public yet, but he has a chance, a possibility of freedom. While Christa has a date with death, the disparity becomes impossible to ignore. 1 year of age difference. Same crime. He might go free. She's scheduled to die. Is this justice? Is this the system working as intended? Or is this arbitrary and capricious, the exact thing the Supreme Court said the death penalty shouldn't be? As 2026 begins, the execution date is now months away. Tennessee begins its preparations. The execution protocol is reviewed. The chemicals are ordered. The team is trained. The execution chamber at Riverbend Maximum Security Institution is prepared. Everything must be ready. Everything must work perfectly. Because if Tennessee is going to take a life, it has to be done according to the law, according to procedure, according to the standards that separate execution from murder. Pike's final appeals reach their last stages. Federal courts. Last chance habeas petitions. Emergency motions. Her lawyers are running out of options. The execution date is approaching. Spring turns to summer. Summer turns to early fall. And suddenly it's September 2026. The month. The final countdown measured in weeks instead of months. The question everyone is asking is simple but impossible to answer. Should Christa Pike be executed? There's no easy answer. What she did was monstrous. Torture. Murder. Taking a piece of her victim's skull as a trophy. But what was done to her was also monstrous. Years of abuse. Trauma. A childhood that destroyed her brain before it finished developing. She was 18. Her co-defendant was 17. One got death. One got a chance at parole. The system created this outcome. A jury of 12 people looked at the same evidence and decided that Christa Pike should die. Another jury looked at Tadaro Shipp and decided he should live. Is that justice? Or is that just how the system happened to work out? Colleen Slemmer's family deserves justice. They deserve to know that the person who tortured and killed their daughter faced consequences. They've waited 31 years for this execution. 31 years of appeals and delays and watching Christa Pike live while Colleen remains dead. But does executing Christa Pike bring Colleen back? Does it heal the wound? Or does it just add another death to the tragedy? These are the questions that death penalty cases always raise. And they never get easier to answer. As September 30, 2026 approaches, Tennessee prepares. The execution team runs through procedures. The witnesses are selected. Colleen's family is offered the opportunity to watch. Pike's lawyers are offered the same. The media requests access. The protocols are followed. Everything by the book. Pike spends her final days in death watch. A special cell even more isolated than regular death row. Guards watch her constantly. She's allowed final visits. Final phone calls. Final meals. Final everything. The rituals of death row. The procedures meant to make this humane. To make it civilized. To make it different from murder. On the morning of September 30th, if the execution proceeds, Christa Pike will be taken from her cell. She'll be prepared. She'll be walked or wheeled to the execution chamber. She'll be strapped to the gurney. 4 lines will be inserted. Final words will be offered. The chemicals will flow. And approximately 31 years after she killed Colleen Slemmer, the state of Tennessee will kill Christa Pike. She'll be the first woman executed in Tennessee in over 200 years. She'll be remembered as one of the youngest women ever sentenced to death in America. She'll become a statistic, a case study, a debate point in death penalty arguments for years to come. Or maybe none of this happens. Maybe a last-minute appeal succeeds. Maybe the governor grants clemency. Maybe the execution is stayed. Maybe Christa Pike lives to see October 2026 and beyond. Maybe she spends the rest of her natural life in prison. Maybe she dies old in a cell decades from now. Maybe the system decides that 31 years on death row is enough. That executing her serves no purpose. That mercy is possible even for people who showed none. As this documentary ends, we don't know which outcome will happen. The date is set. The preparations are made. But death penalty cases have been stopped at the last minute before. Governors have granted clemency. Courts have issued stays. Nothing is certain until it's over. What we do know is this. On January 12, 1995, Colleen Slemmer was tortured and murdered by Christa Pike in Tatterall Ship. Colleen was 19. She never got to live the life she should have had. On March 30, 1996, Christa Pike was sentenced to death. She was 19. She spent the next 30 years waiting to die. In November 2025, Tatterall Ship became eligible for parole. He was sentenced to life. He might go free. 3 people involved in one murder. 3 completely different outcomes. And on September 30, 2026, we'll find out if the youngest woman on death row in America will finally be executed. Or if after 3 decades, the cycle of violence will finally stop.